on the video at a later date. I would like to start us off with a land acknowledgement. So just taking a moment to reflect on where you may be coming from today. UBC's Point Grey campus is located on the traditional, ancestral and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. The land it is situated on has always been a place of learning for the Musqueam people, who for millennia have passed on their culture, history, and traditions from one generation to the next on this site. And I have the privilege to both work, live, and play on this unceded territory. We acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen, Songhees, and Esquimalt peoples on whose territory the Vancouver Island Speech-Language Pathology Program is located, and the Algonquin and Musqueam peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. So to jump right into our plan for the next just under an hour, on the call today, the ACE team, we have Marcia, Kate, Darlene, Lisa, Cheryl, Jamie, Bailey, and myself, Yvonne. Sasha unfortunately couldn't make it, but sends her regards. And we received some questions from you, the clinical educators, that we will walk through and hopefully respond satisfactorily for you all today. So Lisa is going to kick us off in a moment around information for novice clinical educators, specifically some expectations and the kind of support that is available for you. I'll take over to talk about some expectations and guidelines around supervision. So what Supervision Plus looks like, and hopefully give you some tips and strategies around that. Marcia will continue to share around a little bit around student caseload, the balance between what they need to sort of do in terms of shadowing, observing, and hands-on during placement, and a little bit around clinical hours. Cheryl and I will talk a little bit around student projects and some expectations there. Oh, and excuse me, Darlene, I forgot you for the student caseload piece too, my apologies. And then we're hoping we'll have time for a bit of a group discussion for the final question where we can all maybe give some thoughts around that piece. So I'll stop sharing and I will hand over to Lisa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Luft. I'm a newer member of the clinical educator or the clinical coordinator team rather at UBC SAS. I'm here on an interim covering on a leave. I'm very happy to be here today and be part of this team and to be on the other side of the tables, as I've been in the same shoes as many of you in the past several times. So I understand your questions, and I think I will roll those two questions about preparation and support into the same answer. And I'm going to start by linking the website for our virtual community of practice. So if you were to simply just search for UBC SAS, you would come to this homepage. But once you are on there, and I will segue into sharing, I will show you some of the resources that we have. So when you first get your externship schedule from our clinical coordinator, Jamie Nagy, she will send you a link to this resource page as well. So before the externship, you will get the information about the days that you will see the student. If there's any preferences for days of the week, you can connect with the student and coordinate about that. You can share some information about your site and yourself and your overall expectations with the student ahead of the externship. And they will in return probably have much information back to you by email. And then along with that, at any point, please know you're always free to reach out to your clinical coordinator, which is one of our team members. You will be given one of our names in that initial schedule from Jamie. But ahead of the externship, I encourage all of you, whether you're new to being a CE or you're being a practicing CE, to regularly check the Virtual Community of Practice website. So on that, can everyone see the screen now? On that, you will see the clinical educator resources. And I'm just going to bounce between my windows that I have open. If you were to follow that for either speech pathology or audiology, you will see links to many resources. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a drop down for clinical teaching mini modules, self-directed clinical education learning modules, which give you many, many different places to look for all the different aspects of being a clinical educator. Along with that, on the home page, you will see a link to our student handbooks, which I believe Darlene is going to go into in more depth. But in the handbooks for the clinical educators, there is a week by week goal setting and progress expectations for the clinical educator and the student. So you can look up first externship and week by week, where should the student be? How much feedback should they be given? How many responsibilities should they have in their day? And that will give you some really nice guidelines of where you should be at each week for each of the externships. And along with that, we just want to encourage you, I'm going to stop sharing now, that please don't feel that even with all these resources online that you don't have the ability to reach out to us before or during placement. We are there for you as well as for the student. So please feel free to connect with us by email. We're very happy to set up meetings and on the phone or by Zoom, and we're there to support you with any questions that you may have, particularly if you're a new clinical educator. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Any questions from anybody on any of that thus far? All right, we will get going on to the next sort of grouping of groups of questions around guidelines and estimation of feedback and supervision plus, as we are kind of calling it. So the questions were, how many hours of paperwork outside of direct supervision time is expected per student per placement? And is it possible to estimate the amount of time reporting on student progress throughout the externship or the semester? And so ultimately, the clinical educator, you are in control of the schedule. So you are in control of when you would schedule time for feedback, when you would schedule time for downtime, when you would schedule time for the student to perhaps reflect and do some other projects, other work on the placement. We understand that the supervision plus, so the giving feedback, making time for even responding to our emails, making time for the midterm and final, is the extra or an additional layer of the externship process, but it is a really, really important one. Having said that, it is, we believe, quality over quantity. So it's not necessarily the amount of time that you are giving to the student, but I think it's really important to have a schedule time. So have the expectations clear right from the get-go. We find that students can often get a little bit anxious when they're unsure of when they're going to receive the feedback, if it's not sort of as clearly laid out for them, which can be hard, especially if you have a caseload that maybe is a little bit unpredictable. But we do really encourage you to, in so much as is possible, put aside a time or times per week. Maybe it's daily, maybe that's not possible where you are, maybe it's weekly, maybe it's twice per week, whatever is doable. And that's where we talk about that CE being in control of the schedule, whatever is doable for you and your schedule. It is perfectly reasonable to set boundaries. Your day starts at a certain time, your day ends at a certain time. And similarly, it should start and end at a certain time for the students too, right? Everybody needs that balance. And so we really encourage you to think about that too when you are managing what is sort of directly observing and supervising the student, and then those extra pieces. One other sort of strategy, if that we have found helpful, and that I when I have students over externship 3 that I find particularly helpful, is that I will write down my feedback for the student throughout the day. And so we only actually meet at the end of the day for maybe 15-20 minutes to debrief and for me to give that specific feedback. I will give them the written feedback after we've discussed it. And so really throughout the day, the only feedback I will give them is if it's if it's in the moment and it's going to directly impact the session, or if they're going from one session to the other and they need to maybe hear something that will impact how they continue for the day. So having those set times, and I'm very clear with the students that those are the times that I meet with them throughout the day. And we discussed that right at the beginning when we set up midterm and final evaluation. So I think many of you will have heard us recommend that as well, that right when you have your student in that orientation kind of discussions, you set those meetings up from right from the outset. If possible, setting up those feedback times right from the outset too can protect your time and give the students some clear expectations. So I think those are the main pieces that we wanted to cover around feedback and setting those boundaries and the time. There's no right or wrong. There's no set time. It has to depend on you and your caseload and what's manageable. But I think in so much as possible, clear expectations and clear scheduling around when it happens can be of benefit to both you and the student. So I believe Marcia and Darlene, I'm handing over to you.
Great. Darlene, do you want to start up or do you want me to start?
I can start if you want.
Okay.
So I'll just read the question that we were going to address. It is, what is the expected balance between case shadowing and the student managing cases independently? And are there any specific requirements for the number of direct care hours the student must complete? So in part to address this, I'm going to take you to the because we do have some guidelines in there. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so here's the homepage for our community of practice. I'm an audiologist, so I'm going to go into the audiology clinical educator resources section. And then I'm going to go here to the audiology clinical educator handbook. Okay, so when I'm looking at the contents for the handbook, here in this section, externship overview and roles and responsibilities on page 6, that is where I'm going to find what we call a week-by-week guide. And so at the beginning of the chart, this talks a little bit about things that should happen before the externship starts. And then there is a week-by-week guide for the placements. And for audiology, all of our placements are the same lengths. They're all either 6 weeks at 5 days a week or 7 weeks at 4 days a week. So we really just have one guide for you that is good for all of the placements. And so it will talk a little bit about how during the first week, there's things that need to happen like orientation, but also the student will start by doing some guided observation. And by the end of the week, we would like them to be starting to participate in some of the sessions. And the guideline there for the end of the week is for about 1.5 to 2 clinical hours per day. Okay. And then as we go through week 2 and 3, observations continue, it says, but we want gradually the students to participate more. And so one strategy you can use to do that is that they can participate in part of a session. You can give them a specific task to do during that session. So for example, you might say, okay, you're going to do the pure tone audiometry for this session, and I will do all of the rest. Or you might say, you'll do the case history for this part and I'll do the rest of the assessment. But getting them slowly involved by doing some partial participation in each session is a good way to move participating. So here for end of week 2, they should be doing 2 to 3 clinical hours per day. End of week 3, 3 to 4 clinical hours per day. So as each week goes by, they should be doing more participation with the clients and a little bit less observation. And then as we move to the final weeks of the placement, week 4, they should be doing 4 to 5 clinical hours. Weeks 5 to 6, 7, they should be doing 4 to 6 clinical hours per day. So one thing I guess that I would just like to stress is that we don't have an expectation that you will arrange your schedule to get students more clinical hours. They will meet their requirement for clinical hours across their 4 externships. And they don't need you to design anything specific for them in terms of getting that. They should just be participating with you in your caseload. And like I mentioned before, we do want to see them moving along the continuum from observation to participating, and then hopefully by the end of the placement to be able to do at least some of the straightforward cases, mostly independently. They will still need some general guidance from you. And again, depending on the level of learning of the student, if this is a first externship versus a 4th externship, they may be able to jump in faster on their 4th externship and start doing more sooner. But if they aren't making that progression from observation to participating and then being able to take on more of a role in the session, that is a concern, and that is something that you should contact your clinical coordinator about. So I think that's all I was going to say, Marcia. I'll pass it on to you.
Sure. So I'll take the speech component. If you don't mind driving the handbook for me, Darlene, I really would appreciate
that.
So we're going to go into the VCOP as well. I really need to reinforce and support the statement that Darlene made about not customizing your placement. You are not on the hook to create a perfect placement experience. What they are getting from you is an authentic exposure to your work, your caseload, and all the dynamics that accompany both of them. So they might have interests in certain things, but you are by no means obliged to pull a rabbit out of a hat. Is that understood? Okay, so we have on this section, this is the SLP one. If you go into the Educator Handbook, and page, as with all speech pathologists, we love our words, so we have more pages than our lovely sisters in audiology. So pages 16 will look very much like what you saw for audiology. And where the meat sort of comes to answer this question will be page 20. So you have the trajectory, the continuum, pages 16. Oh, it looks just, keep going. Oh, that looks very similar, but there are no hours in here. So we will go to page 20. And here you start to see guidelines, not expectations, but guidelines for exposure. So if you go to page 21, you start to see, oh yeah, this is what I should shoot for. And it gives you some ideas of the activities that are really well fitted to the number of hours that are posted as potential. So of course, if it's the student's first placement, there is going to be less expectation of independence, but the sharing of tasks is really useful. Either sharing the tasks or assigning tasks within your sessions. And my tip is always, if you have ongoing clients, then certainly that is, where they have highly routinized or they can see the pattern in your intervention or assessment with them, by all means, start assigning them things they must do in that session. And then if you have new clients, maybe that's where there's a little bit more shadowing, but with the expectation that they will start to take things over. Can I just say there's no picking and choosing? So students must stretch in the learning environment. If they do shadowing, it's an observation placement. That is not what the placement is about. It is about active learning. So each student may have a different tolerance, or what I learned last Friday, a different window of tolerance, but this is the active learning component of their program full on. So students often are asked about their learning style. I always challenge that somewhat because the learning style certainly shows self-awareness, but it can also be a means to identify their comfort zone. And what we know on our team is learning happens slightly outside of the comfort zone. So we do support you to assign tasks and share tasks and assign them responsibilities that will allow them to experience the continuity in their learning and their stretch. So each of these, and you will go through these, there's exercise 2, 3, and 4 also have guidelines. That first placement, there's no expectation that the student will take more than 40 to 50% of your caseload, and that might be 40 to 50% of that particular client, for example. So it's up to you to determine with our help and support the level of your student. And as Lisa gracefully said, and Darlene as well, that you can lean on us, and Evan, of course, you can lean on us. There isn't a question we have not been asked. And in fact, the timing of the question earlier is always better than later. So I think that's all here. So there are no specific requirements for hours. Students seem to come thinking they need to have a certain number of hours. And I don't know where they get that because it's not from us. So if they asked us that question, we'd say you'd get few at the beginning, and then as you progress and get proficient, you will get more at the end. But I think people talk to each other and they're like, I got 60, I got 90, I got 10. And then there's that fear of missing out thing that comes out of nowhere. So please, again, reach out to us if you feel inordinate pressure on providing hours, or the observation that a student isn't leaning into the active learning component. Rest of the team, have I missed anything there?
I was just going to add that we do give our students, I think, good training on how to count clinical hours. And so we don't expect our clinical educators to know all the ins and outs about how counting hours. You should just encourage them to direct that question to the clinical coordinator. We don't expect you to know how to answer all of that yourselves.
Mm-hmm. Any questions so far? We've done several questions. Okay. Thank you, Evan.
Great. Okay. I'll move on to the next next theme, which is around student projects, and specifically whether the possibility exists for a student to complete a small project or presentation of interest while they're on placement. And that might be because caseload maybe is a little lighter. The example given in the question was throughout the summer months, or it might just be that it is part of your practice. So the short answer is yes, absolutely, it is possible. And Cheryl, do you want me to turn it over to you now to give some examples, and I can follow up?
Sure, thanks, Ben. Yeah, so when I was a clinical educator on a neuro stroke unit, one of the expectations for our students, our SLP students, which we talked about at the very beginning of the placement when we were talking about overall expectations to set a successful and positive overall learning experience for both of us, was that the student would be responsible for completing one project. And for example, they could do a presentation, and it was a teaching hospital, so there was all other social work, occupational therapy, physical therapy students there as well. So they could either present on a topic of their choice, or they could make an aphasia-friendly material for our unit. And an example of that would be taking the existing handy bus instructions, which are very, very confusing, even to not a person with aphasia, and making them aphasia friendly for not only the clients on our caseload, but for future clients that would come to the unit. And all of the students and our interdisciplinary team gave great feedback to our students about how well the projects were done or how well the presentations were done. So it's good learning for not only the students, but for the whole team. Thanks again.
Yeah, and similarly, the clinical externships are courses at the end of the day, and that involves some direct work. So obviously seeing clients and getting that hands-on experience, but it's the learning around the edges of that as well. And oftentimes that can come out best through a project or through a presentation to others. So I have students typically for externship 3. I take them at within the Aphasia Mentors program, which runs in the morning. And so similar to what Cheryl had said, there's an expectation right from the get-go. They send us their intro email and I respond back with some of the prep work that they need to do ahead of their time with me. But in that email is the statement that they will be completing a project, that their afternoons will be spent doing, just as Cheryl said, maybe it's communicatively accessible materials. Last year it was doing mentor interviews and creating some resources for the website. And so it's never just a nice to have. It's something that the program needs. It's something that we've identified as a need, and actually almost put it on the long finger until I do have my externship students. So if there are tasks like that that occur for you at your site, and if you do know regularly that you take a student for X placement or, this time of year, you can sort of store those up. That's something that I find really, really helpful, and it always gets the job done for us so that we have a new product of sorts at the end of December. And the students are always really proud to have their name on something. There's a student resource that we use every year, have done for the last 8 years, that have students who graduated 8 years ago, their name on it. And so they're still represented in that resource, and they're still remembered. That's sort of their legacy to the program. So it can be a really nice additional aspect or a component of the externship. Did I miss anything?
No, I think the thing here, Evan, and what I'm hearing, Cheryl, I know Lisa as well at GF Strong, that there was a expectation, is to state that expectation at the beginning of your placement.
Mm-hmm.
The question was framed, it was slow in the summer, should I have assigned a project? You don't have to wait till that happens. If you have something that is feasible and small and doable, that probably would be a great thing to put in those non-clinical hour of your day where you need to do charting or you need to go to a meeting and the student has, not free time, but time where they can focus on something else. That is not a bad thing to express at the beginning, that there may be an expectation that you will take on a project. And that way it'll just take away from you feeling awkward about assigning it midway, or, just say there may be. And that way it'll give you the liberty to assign and determine the need for it.
I
Is
see a
there
question
expectation
here.
that-
Oh, thanks, Marsha. You go ahead.
Yeah, is there an expectation that the students share a case study for their classmates in coursework? It's not something that formally, we don't know all the ins and outs of the curriculum. I can say after their first summer, they are expected to have examples for class to apply their learning to their learning in the placement, but I can't speak to whether it is a formal expectation of any of the curricular content.
Yeah, I would echo that. To my knowledge, it's not a formal requirement through any of the coursework that they take, but certainly they are asked to draw upon their experience and examples for group discussions, group work. Sometimes we will try and divvy them up in, who's experienced this, that, and the other, so that they have a sort of wide range of experiences within their smaller groups. But that would be the extent of it, I think.
And then the SLP cohorts, they have an e-portfolio, so they have to reflect on some of their learning, which can include some of their cases that are anonymized and for their learning.
So any other questions at this point before we move towards one of the last questions that we have that we were hoping to open up for your thoughts? Feel free to put it in the chat or just simply shout out. All right, if not, then I will share one of the final questions that we have. So can a student outright refuse options that are not of interest to them? And what could or should be done in those moments? So maybe to provide context, perhaps you are suggesting a project or you are suggesting, attending a meeting that maybe is on a different ward or a different, slightly different subject, and the student says, no, thank you. What could or should be done? So any thoughts from our clinical educators today? Has that happened to you? If yes, would you care to share what your maybe response was or how you handled that situation? Or if you've thoughts of how we could address this. It is something I think as an ACE team we are recognizing happens perhaps a little bit more commonly, more recently. Any thoughts?
It's Deb Woodland here.
I did.
How are you?
Good.
I think I would probably want to have more of a conversation as to why they might not want to participate. Do I need to provide more support in an area of learning? Is there an ethical reason or personal reason that they might not want to do that? I think being open to those kind of conversations, and is there a way we can modify it that might suit everybody? It's not really an answer. It's just a question.
No, I think
it's hard to say, right?
But it's I think to what you're getting, it's addressing it. I think it's sort of getting to the elephant in the room,
Yeah.
rather than maybe having that sort of, oh, they said no, and not quite sure what to do in that moment, really saying, well, okay, but why? And
Yeah.
trying to understand it, not in a confrontational manner, of course. But as you say, really just getting a sense as to where that reluctance may be coming from, so that you can meet the student better where they're at and possibly flesh it out a bit more. I think that's really key.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say that I've experienced that myself, so that would probably be a starting point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I would just add to Deborah's suggestions that I agree. I've had the experience of had a student refuse to do a task, but it for the same reason we had a conversation, but it was more out of fear and lack of confidence. So with that information, as you suggested, then we went back to, okay, what can we do? In this particular case, it was an oral motor exam. And we said, oh, what can we do to practice? Let's do it on each other first. Maybe you can try with a friend or a classmate. And then that gave her more confidence coming into clinic. She was able to do it with a client the next time around. So yeah, absolutely, Deb. I think that having that conversation to figure out why and the reasons behind the refusal.
Mm-hmm. I think there's some value also to thinking about what made it an option. You have to prepare yourself for your clients. You have expectations and standards for your practice. If it's integral, they're not, these things are not options for you. So the placement is about learning under your supervision and under your coaching. And so again, we would support you to state it as an expectation. And as Lisa and Deb have said, maybe probe more, particularly if you see it as a pattern. If it happens twice, I would ask. I'm noticing there are some things that you're refusing, and use concrete words. You can't No one can tell you you didn't experience a refusal, right? Can you tell me more about that? It's going to impact your learning on the placement. We'll need to work around that, or we need to work through it. So sort of identifying that it has been noted, that it is part of your practice, that it is part of the learning, and that you have an expectation that at some degree that there will be the student also experiencing or learning through that opportunity. And again, you can always lean on the ACE or the clinical coordinator here to address anything that might be a communication or interpersonally based. We will never put you in the middle, and we'll never put the student in the middle, which is why you want us in the middle, so that we can navigate it. Yes, Melina, these conversations do happen, and we are very happy, as Evan has noted, to be informed by your needs for subsequent sessions. So if you want help with that conversation outside of the heat of a placement, we're happy to help you with that as well, because we know what the students learn as well.
There's just a comment, Marcia, from Julia. At the outset of the externship, talk about the various learning opportunities and how to plan for any supports that may be needed. So I think that ties in with what you've been saying. Set those expectations, and less options, more expectations, and that there are opportunities for growth and learning. Cheryl?
Yeah, I'd just like to add just on that theme, on page 31 of the Clinical Educator Handbook, there's a really great checklist called Setting Expectations that you can use with your student right from the very beginning. When I was a clinical educator, if I had the leeway in my schedule to do so, I would book a whole morning or sometimes even a whole day, depends on my schedule, just to talk about orientation and to talk about setting those expectations. So there's that checklist on page 31 of the handbook if you wanted to use it to guide your conversations and to guide the questions that you ask the student, and also to know that it's a collaborative conversation. So the student can ask you questions about orientation. What are your expectations for the placement? How do you like to give feedback, right? So it's not just a one-way conversation. We really do hope it's collaborative. But page 31, if you don't know where to start, that's a really great place to start for setting the positive expectations from the very beginning.
There's also a form, and we call a mandatory form, but we have no way of knowing if the students do it for the clinical educators. It's feedback to the clinical educator. There's a short form for the midterm, and there's a longer form for the final. And the vision is that they get swapped at each point in their evaluation. So at midterm, you can have your feedback from yours, the student's feedback to you. Same thing at final, and you can swap them in the moment at that point. That midterm one really does go through many of the orientation and expectations aspects of that first part of the placement that Cheryl has given you the guidelines and content for. So that's very handy to use as a frame as well for yourself. And the student should be asking you if you would like one. And if you would like one, you should have one.
Any more thoughts or questions from our clinical educators on the call about this, or any of what we've discussed so far today? Another point that we can add just with regards the oh, Julie, I'll get to your comment just a moment. Thank you. Similar to asking about what the Supervision Plus looks like, and you have permission to set the boundaries around your time. I think sometimes students can come in strong setting boundaries for their time. So similar to what has been discussed about having, probing the why they maybe are refusing. I think sometimes it can just be a sign that the student maybe is feeling a little overwhelmed. Maybe there's more going on outside the placement. Maybe they're, we do give a guideline of 10 hours of homework per week per externship. Perhaps they're going over and beyond with some of that, and that can come to light if you have those conversations. So it really is about that communication, and not jumping to how sometimes I feel if someone is saying no, kind of jumping to the defensive, almost like, why are they saying no? And how uncomfortable that can feel, but really trying to have the most the kindest interpretation of where that no is coming from, and going a little bit further. Yeah, Julia, absolutely. Those regular check-ins, and I think that's sort of where I'm going with the ongoing communication as well, so that they can understand where we're coming from as CEs, and we can understand where they're coming from as students, and hopefully finding that happy middle ground, where we're kind of trucking along happily together. And yes, 10 hours, thanks, Marcia, required, but not a maximum. Yeah.
I'd like to comment, I know we should wrap very soon, but I think either Lisa or Deb said it. You don't have to do all the heavy lifting if you're probing a trend. You can ask the student questions like, what strategies have worked for you in the past? What's different about this situation? Think about it, think about it overnight. What are the concrete things that you can do and that we can do to make sure you get the learning, but under conditions that make it easier or more comfortable for you? We don't think that we can guess what works for people, and we can use a lot of our energy in trying to guess and fix, but this is a partnership, and it is fully within your rights to expect a partner in managing some of the dynamics, good or bad, right? We've talked mostly about things that are, uncomfortable, but you can also have a student that's overdoing it, or a student that never sees a success in their progress and only sees a negative. So it can go either way, but the curiosity that Deb first initiated, that's always the best first step, is to assume the curiosity, and then use the resourcefulness of the student so that it's shared.
So we are getting close to wrapping up. Any final comments or questions? As we mentioned, this recording will be made available on the VCOP. So as you've heard many times throughout the last 40-ish or so minutes, do make that sort of a bookmark on your browser, because we are constantly updating or adding or linking resources there, and that's our way of sort of having that continuous communication with you, and hopefully supporting you as you support us and support our students, and that's ultimately what this is about, that reciprocity, to keep the clinical education bus going. Thank you, Marcia. Echoed. All right, well, if there's nothing else, we can, I think, stop the recording, and we can say see you soon, or be in touch soon, most likely, especially if you're taking SLP Externship 3. You will be hearing from us in the coming weeks.